In a small, long-abandoned town in the middle of a dense forest lurked a secret that frightened all who heard of it. The locals called this town Eclipse because of its perpetual semi-darkness. Even on clear days, the sun barely broke through the dense cover of trees. On every corner, decrepit houses overgrown with moss whispered of forgotten times. But one house in particular stood out. Victor's workshop. Victor was a master craftsman whose masks had once been famous throughout the area. His work was extremely detailed, made of leather, metal, and wood. It was said that each mask seemed to come to life on the wearer's face, changing his features and character. But the most famous was his last work, the Mask of Terror. Years ago, Victor was a respected man. People came to his workshop from all over the country to order masks for carnivals, performances, and secret meetings. His family, his wife Lydia and daughter Clara helped him with his work. Lydia sewed the fabrics for the masks, and Clara decorated them with fine details. Their life was peaceful until one fateful night, when everything changed. It was said that that night Victor was working on a new mask that was to be the pinnacle of his craftsmanship. He locked himself in his workshop for days, not even coming out for dinner. His family worried, but dared not disturb his seclusion. When he finally came out, there was a mask on his face. It was made of a strange material that resembled human skin and seemed alive. Lydia cried out when she saw it, and Clara cried. Victor was silent. He only said, "It will protect us." The next day, Lydia and Clara disappeared. No one saw them leave the house. Neighbors tried to find out what had happened, but Victor only closed the door silently in front of curious stares. Over time, people stopped coming to see him. His house and workshop became a place to be avoided. Years later, two young journalists, Alexei and Marina, came to Eclipse. They were investigating old legends and heard about the Mask of Terror. The legend said that anyone who wore this mask lost their soul forever, becoming a puppet of dark forces. It's just a myth, but what material for an article? Marina said, smiling. Alexei, more skeptical, nodded. Legends are legends, but someone made them up. We need to find out more. They stopped at the nearest town and hired a guide, an elderly man named Stefan who had once lived in Eclipse. "Aren't you afraid?" he asked, leading them through the dense forest. "What have we got to be afraid of? It's just an old house and fiction." Stefan grinned grimly. "I wouldn't think so, if I were you." Victor was not such an ordinary man. It has been said that he knew things we are not given to understand. When they reached Eclipse, the city greeted them with dead silence. Even the wine seemed to avoid the place. Victor's workshop stood in the center of town, like a rotting tooth among the ruined buildings. Its windows were boarded up, but the door was ajar, as if inviting them in. "I don't like it," Alexei muttered. "We're here for the material." "Don't forget," Marina replied, pulling out her camera. Inside, the workshop looked like the owner had only been out for a minute. There were tools, pieces of cloth, and unfinished masks on the tables. The air was saturated with the smell of mold and something metallic. "Look," Marina whispered, pointing to a shelf. There lay a mask that looked as if it had come to life. Her eyes were blank, but they seemed to follow every movement. Alexei reached out to take it, but suddenly the door slammed shut with a clatter. They turned around, but saw no one. "Must be the wind," he muttered, but his voice shook. They decided to stay in the house overnight to explore the place in more detail. Stepan, citing his age, refused to spend the night with them and went into the woods. "You are making a great mistake," he threw in parting. The night was dark and quiet. Alexei and Marina made themselves comfortable in the old bedroom. Marina fell asleep almost immediately, but Alexei could not sleep a wink. His attention was attracted by a quiet rustling. It came from the corridor. At first he thought it was mice, but the sound grew louder and closer. He got up, grabbed a flashlight, and walked out into the hallway. The light of the flashlight picked out the shabby walls and dusty floors. Suddenly he noticed movement. A figure stood at the end of the hallway. It was tall, with distorted facial features, and held something in its hands. Alexei froze. The figure began to slowly approach, and Alexei realized that it was a masked man. But this mask was strange, as if her face was moving beneath the surface.
"Who are you?"
he wheezed. There was no reply. The figure froze for a moment, and then vanished into the darkness. The next morning, Alexei told Marina what had happened. She did not believe him, writing everything off to fatigue and imagination. But, searching the house, they found a door they had not seen before. It led to the basement. There might be something interesting down there, Marina suggested. They went down the creaky stairs. The basement was filled with old boxes, tools, and books. On one of the tables lay a book with a leather cover. Alexei opened it and read a few lines. It was Victor's diary. It described his experiments with masks and something called an awakening ritual. He seems to have believed that a mask could connect a person to the other world, Alexei said. Marina found a box of photographs. One of them showed Victor's family, but the other showed strange masked figures standing around a fire. It looks like some kind of ritual, she whispered. Suddenly the basement felt cold. The light from the flashlights began to fade, then went out altogether. In the silence came a voice, a whisper coming from deep in the basement.
"You're not alone here."